Right now, I want you to stop and look at the nearest chair in the room. In about 2 minutes, I'm going to ask you to sit down in it, stand up 5 times, and time yourself. And that number is going to tell you something your last physical probably didn't. It may tell you whether your body is quietly heading toward a fall this year or whether you're in better shape than you think. My name is Dr. Nathan Wells. I'm a board-certified internal medicine physician, and I've spent over 2 decades working exclusively with adults over 50. Falls, balance, and what the aging body loses before it shows any symptoms. That's been the center of my clinical work for most of my career. I've sat across from patients who had no idea their body was quietly losing the capacity to catch itself, and I've had to deliver news to families in hospital hallways after a fall changed everything overnight. Here's what that clinical experience runs up against. The CDC reports that 1 in 4 Americans over 65 falls every year, and most of them had no warning. 3 million emergency room visits annually, just from falls. That's not a statistic about frailty or end-of-life decline. That's people who turned too fast in the hallway, stepped off a curb wrong, or reached for something on a shelf on a completely ordinary Tuesday. The part that stays with me as a physician is that falls are the leading cause of injury-related death in adults over 65, and most of them happen to people who didn't know they were at elevated risk. What I'm going to show you today is a specific, validated test that takes 30 seconds, requires only a chair, and that research published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society shows can predict fall risk with striking accuracy, by age group, with specific cutoff numbers. You'll know exactly how to do it correctly, what your score means, and what to do with that number regardless of where it lands. I'll also walk you through what to do if your score isn't where it should be, because knowing your risk without a path forward is just anxiety. There is one finding buried in the original research on this test, something the scientists almost didn't notice, that changes how doctors think about who is actually at risk. It has nothing to do with falls. Stay with me because it reframes the whole conversation. If this kind of content is useful to you, drop your score in the comments after you take the test. I'm genuinely curious how many people are watching this and finding out something about themselves for the first time. Before we get into it, everything I share here is education, not a diagnosis. Your own doctor knows your full history in ways I can't from a screen. Use this as a starting point for a real conversation with them, not a replacement for one. The test is called the 5 times sit to stand test, and the premise is almost insultingly simple. You stand up from a chair 5 times, as fast as you safely can, without using your arms, and time how long it takes. No equipment, no gym, just a chair, a phone timer, and about 30 seconds of honest effort. Here's how to do it correctly, because form matters more than most people realize. Sit toward the front edge of a firm chair, not a soft sofa or a recliner. Those change the mechanics, with your feet flat on the floor roughly hip-width apart, arms crossed over your chest. The moment you start the timer, stand fully upright, then return to seated, then stand again. 5 complete cycles, full stand to full sit, no pause, without holding anything. When your backside touches the chair on the 5th rep, stop the timer. That number is your score. Go do it now if you can. I'll be here when you get back. The benchmarks published in the research are specific. For adults 60 to 69, completing 5 reps in 11 seconds or faster is considered normal functional strength and balance. Ages 70 to 79, the benchmark is 12 seconds. For adults 80 and older, 14 seconds. If your time runs more than 2 seconds above those numbers, the research associates that with measurably elevated fall risk, reduced lower body strength, and in some studies, early signals of cognitive decline as well. Write that down. Your score, your age group's cutoff, and the gap between them. That gap is the whole conversation. And now I want to speak directly to the people who just scored above that cutoff, maybe well above it. I know what that number can feel like. A verdict, a confirmation of something you'd been quietly afraid of. It is not a verdict. It's a finding. There's a critical difference, and I'm going to explain exactly what it means before this video is over. Don't go anywhere. Margaret was 67 when she came to see me after her daughter practically dragged her in. She'd had 2 near falls in 3 months, one in the bathroom, one reaching into the garage, but hadn't actually fallen outright, so she wasn't particularly worried. She told me she felt fine. Her FTSST time was 16.4 seconds, well outside the normal range for her age. Her balance wasn't collapsing. It was eroding slowly, the way a riverbank gives way not in one flood, but in 1,000 small rainstorms. She had no idea. The test found something her annual physical had missed for years, and it took 30 seconds to find it. The reason this test catches what standard physicals miss goes back to how most clinical environments measure balance, or don't. A typical office visit checks whether you can stand on one foot for a few seconds, or walk a short hallway, or answer questions about dizziness. None of that puts the body under the specific neuromuscular demand that actually predicts fall risk. Rising from a chair repeatedly is one of the most metabolically and neurologically complex things the human body does. It requires the brain to fire coordinated signals across multiple joints simultaneously, while the ankle and knee stabilizers make thousands of tiny postural corrections in real time. Think of it like a rope bridge. The planks are your big muscle groups, the quadriceps, the glutes. You can walk across with a few planks missing, but the ropes holding the planks, those are the stabilizers, and when those fray, the whole bridge can drop without warning. The FTSST stresses every rope simultaneously in under a minute. A study published in Gait and Posture followed older adults over time and found that FTSST scores degraded measurably 1 to 2 years before a first fall occurred. 1 to 2 years of warning. Most of the people in that study had no symptoms. They felt steady. They weren't dizzy. Their falls came later, suddenly, from situations their bodies could no longer adapt to fast enough. Here's something the benchmarks alone won't tell you, and this is where the test gets more interesting than most people expect. Pay attention to which repetition slowed you down. Most people who score in the borderline range don't struggle on rep 1 or rep 5. They fade on reps 3 and 4, right in the middle. That pattern reveals something different than uniform slowness. Uniform slowness across all 5 reps points primarily to a strength deficit. Fading in the middle is a neuromuscular endurance deficit, the brain-to-muscle signaling chain losing output under sustained demand. And that specific pattern is the one most associated with real-world falls, navigating stairs, stepping off a curb, catching yourself when you stumble. If you tested borderline and the middle reps are where you lost it, that is the most important piece of information you've taken out of this video today. I want to be honest with you about something because I've had this conversation enough times to know how it lands. When I walked Margaret through her results, she pushed back. She'd been gardening, walking the neighborhood, keeping up with her grandchildren, and she felt completely fine. She wasn't wrong. That's exactly what makes this kind of decline so dangerous. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't cause symptoms. It doesn't announce itself. You feel fine right up until the morning you turn too fast, reaching for the remote, and a hip fracture changes everything. I've had that conversation with families in hospital hallways. I would rather have it here, now, before anything happens. There's also a version of this story that goes a different direction, and it matters. A man named Robert, 74, retired engineer, the type who logged everything, had read about this test online before coming in. He walked into my office already knowing his score. 10.8 seconds, solidly normal for his age group. He'd been climbing the stairs in his building twice a day for 3 years. Nothing structured, just a habit he'd kept because his knees felt better afterward. He had no idea that habit was the reason he scored well, that he'd been accidentally training the exact neuromuscular system the FTSST measures. The previous year, his doctor had told him to slow down and take it easy. Robert hadn't listened. On this particular metric, that refusal was the right call. The body that responds to daily demand holds its capacity. The body that rests from challenge loses it on a schedule. Robert is worth knowing about because this works in both directions. The same system that degrades also rebuilds. You are not passively receiving whatever score you got today. Now, the finding I promised you at the start, the one the original researchers almost missed. The 5 times sit-to-stand test doesn't just measure fall risk. It measures something much closer to the rate at which a body is biologically aging. Researchers in a study published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine followed a large cohort of adults over 51 for 10 years, not looking at falls, looking at survival, and found that sit-to-stand capacity was one of the most accurate predictors of 10-year mortality in their entire dataset. Adults who scored in the high-risk range on the FTSST had significantly higher death rates over that decade than those who scored normal, and the association held regardless of age group. More striking, the FTSST outperformed many traditional cardiovascular risk markers, the kind of markers that cost hundreds of dollars to run in a lab: resting heart rate, cholesterol panels, a chair, 5 reps, a phone timer, and it beat them. The reason isn't mysterious once you understand it. The biological systems that let you stand efficiently from a seated position are the same systems governing your cardiovascular resilience, your metabolic flexibility, your neurological health, and your body's ability to regulate inflammation. When those systems are intact, the body adapts to stress, to infection, to the ordinary insults of daily life. When they fray, everything becomes more fragile in parallel. A chair test isn't measuring your legs. It's measuring your entire adaptive capacity. That's why the number matters far beyond falls. That's why I asked you to write it down. If your score is where it should be, one honest word of advice: don't coast. The body that earns a good score in its 60s doesn't hold it automatically into its 70s. It holds it because the person kept doing the things that earned it. Inactivity doesn't just pause your score, it reverses it. If your score is outside the normal range, I want you to hear this clearly. Research from the National Institute on Aging and from clinical trials published in JAMA shows that targeted lower body strength training, even started late, reverses FTSST decline in most adults, meaningfully, not just marginally. And you don't need a gym. The exercises that produce measurable improvement in FTSST scores in adults over 70 are exercises you can do in your living room, starting this week. Slow sit-to-stand practice is the first one. Same motion as the test, but deliberate. 1 minute at a time, focusing on the lowering phase, which is where most of the neuromuscular benefit lives. Chair squats are the second. Hover just above the seat for a 2 count before sitting fully, which trains the exact endurance deficit I described in the middle reps. Heel raises at the kitchen counter, rising slowly onto your toes and lowering back down with control, target the ankle stabilizers most directly linked to fall recovery. These aren't advanced exercises. They're the specific movements the research points to, and 12 weeks of consistent effort, not 12 months, 12 weeks, is enough for most adults to see measurable improvement in their FTSST time and in their balance scores. Take your score to your next appointment. Write down the number, your age group's cutoff, and which reps slowed you down. Show that to your doctor. Ask whether a referral to a physical therapist who specializes in older adults makes sense for you. A good PT can look at where you faded and design something specific to your deficit, not a generic senior class that might miss what you actually need. Let me tell you what happened to Margaret. 6 months after her initial score of 16.4 seconds, she came back and retested. She'd worked with a physical therapist twice a week, done a short home routine every morning before coffee, and made one change to her diet after a separate conversation about protein intake in older adults. Her score at 6 months, 13.1 seconds. Inside the normal range, though not yet at the ideal. No falls in 6 months. She told me the biggest change wasn't the number, it was that she stopped flinching when she walked on uneven sidewalks. That involuntary confidence, the body trusting itself in real space, doesn't appear on a timer, but it's exactly what the timer is pointing toward. 1 chair, 30 seconds. The number you got is not who you are. It's where you are right now. And where you are right now is always the beginning of something. Most people who ask me about fall risk expect me to talk about bathroom grab bars and throw rugs. Those things matter. But the single most powerful predictor of whether you fall, and the single most changeable factor, lives in your legs, your balance system, and the signaling chain between your brain and your muscles. That chain is not fixed. It responds to challenge. It responds to demand. The research says clearly, it responds at every age,